This was not about finding out which veterans he could trust. This was about Steve Kerr trying to determine which of the young players he likes in this series and which ones he's going to roll with, I think, moving forward. It's a risk that Steve Kerr and this coaching staff decided to take to figure out who would be playable in this series and who was not going to be. All right, this was a game that, to me, I think first and foremost was one that was all over the place. It was disjointed. It was jumbled. I mean, right from the start, Minnesota comes out on a 13-0 run. The starting lineup that Steve Kerr used, he basically balls up, throws in the trash. And it felt like that set the tone for what we saw, both from the Warriors, but also from the coaching staff. Like in a game, if you're talking about the kind of moves, the responses that teams make, I didn't think that Minnesota did a whole lot different in game 2. We knew that they weren't going to make only 5 threes. We knew they were going to shoot a little bit better. We saw Anthony Edwards survive an injury to his left ankle in that second quarter and eventually come back. He was much better in this game. Julius Randle was much better in this game. Minnesota's offense was what it was. But what I thought this game was all about really was basically throwing S at the wall and seeing if it would stick. This was a game that was all about, without Steph Curry, understanding that he's not going to be available for at least the next 3 games. Who can play? Seriously, who can play? That's what this game was about for the Warriors. And it feels strange because, in one hand, it was very weird to watch the Warriors, and really Steve Kerr, I would say, throw out all these different lineups. Like, there was a couple that I wrote down that just quite honestly flummoxed me. In the second quarter, we saw a lineup out there with Kevin Knox, Pat Spencer, and Trace Jackson Davis. We saw at one point 13 different men in the rotation in that first half. And I'm thinking, where is this game going? Like, what is Steve Kerr doing? You know, he started Quinton Post, who played the first 3 minutes and 18 seconds. They only got 3 minutes and 18 seconds at a post for the entire game because he was outscored by 13 with him on the floor. Got played off quite quickly. Then the Warriors steadied things in the second quarter when they went to their bench, and I thought they found something with whether it was Jimmy Butler playing with Jonathan Kuminga, Butler playing with Trace Jackson Davis. Those are the two kind of bright spots in this game for me from Golden State. But overall, I just thought that Kerr, he coached like this was a game that he knew that he could not win or was in all probability not going to win. And to me, the way that I thought about this series coming in, because I don't believe that Curry is going to be ready by at least game 6. They might miss him for the entire series. And in a way, it kind of felt like that's the way that Kerr was coaching tonight, where he was throwing a bunch of bleep at the wall, seeing who could play, and what kind of series this was going to be for individual players. And I think that's also, it's also indicative of that because the veterans didn't really play a whole lot. Jimmy Butler only played 34 minutes, which is not a lot for playoff Jimmy. Draymond Green only played 29 minutes. Gary Payton II played 11 minutes. Kevon Looney played a couple of minutes, mainly because TJD was playing well, but the point still stands. This was not about finding out which veterans he could trust. This was about Steve Kerr trying to determine which of the young players he likes in this series and which ones he's going to roll with, I think, moving forward. A lot of people throughout the 48-hour period between Game 1 and Game 2, they had suggested this. But this was mainly, I think, more of a storyline between Game 6 and Game 7 of the first-round series against Houston. Would Kerr open up the rotation when his older guys look gassed? You know, Curry, Jimmy, Draymond looked gassed at the end of Game 6. He didn't. He actually kept things pretty tight in Game 7. And Buddy Hield shot the lights out. Buddy was back in the starting lineup tonight just like he was in Game 1. But after Steph goes down in the second quarter of Game 2, after you survive that game and get a 99-88 win, I do think that the coaching staff looked at the remainder of this series as a chess match. And this was Kerr's first move. And I'm not sure if it's going to work. It's a risky play. But at the same time, I can also understand why. And this series looks completely different already than the one against Houston. I think Minnesota's a less physical team. They're less apt defensively. They're obviously a better offensive squad. And they play various ways. They can play with Gobert off the floor. They can play with Gobert on the floor. They're a completely different team. So in a way, this was an evaluation game from the Warriors. And to me, it's a risk. It's a risk that Steve Kerr and this coaching staff decided to take to figure out who would be playable in this series and who is not going to be. And to me, there are two guys that he figured out are going to be players in this series with Steph Curry not available. I believe at least until Game 6, they might have been playing this game trying to figure out who can play in case Curry can't come back, because that's the kind of really approach I thought we saw from the Warriors tonight. And those two players are Jonathan Kuminga and Trayce Jackson-Davis. And it's odd because those were the players that were pretty much phased out of the first round series and have been phased out, I would say, since the tail end of the regular season. But both of them, you got to give them their credit. I thought Kaminga, along with Trayce Jackson-Davis, were really good in this basketball game for Golden State. I know the final numbers might not be what you wanted to see, but you were trying to figure out and gauge how are you going to find some offense, how you were going to find guys who could stay on the floor. Kaminga in this game, he starts 8 of 8. I know he missed his last 3 shots, and in the second half took some questionable ones. But overall, 18 points. I thought he was active defensively guarding Anthony Edwards, who was obviously hampered by an ankle injury. 5 rebounds for Kaminga. Only 2 turnovers in 26 minutes is not that bad for him. Trayce Jackson-Davis over the course of 20 minutes did not miss a shot. Even went 3 of 5 at the free throw line, which is also not poor for him. 6 rebounds and had 15 points off the bench, was a lob threat. And again, I think those two players were successful in their roles because you could see that compared to Houston, who was playing those 2 bigs, or at the very least had more rim protection in terms of their defense, their weak side, their rotations were quicker, their players, at least defensively, far more locked into the paint. The paint is available in this series. The Warriors have found success, I think, both in games 1 and now game 2. I know they got blown out tonight overall, but they cut it to 7 in the third quarter. But I think overall they found that there is a weakness on this Minnesota team that they can exploit, and it's primarily in the paint. It sounds strange considering they have supposedly one of the best rim blockers, rim defenders in the NBA in Rudy Gobert, but I thought the Warriors got a lot when they hunted him repeatedly in that third period, and even at points in the first half, with Jimmy Butler, with Kaminga, with basically putting him in all the action and forcing him to step out to the perimeter, which I think in one breath, it worked, but it was also the game plan from the start. I think one of the reasons that Post was starting in this game and ended up being a mistake, I didn't necessarily agree with it. I thought that they were going to go bigger, but I thought the option would have been Looney or perhaps even Trayce Jackson-Davis. Post got played off the floor, but the thought process was if you can force Gobert out to the perimeter, you can open up the lane, you can get easier shots, and play Gobert effectively off the floor. I thought the Wolves were much better without Gobert in this game, and that's something that Chris Finch, I think, realized that he had to do towards the middle portion of the third quarter, got some stops, got a couple turnovers, and then his small ball lineup, Aiden, took over. And obviously, with the Warriors down Steph Curry, this is going to be a much easier sort of puzzle to solve if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves. So, as the Warriors, what do you have to respond to? And to me, you again, this was an evaluation game. You figure out who can play, who can't play. To me, the 2 players you found that can play in this series that, ironically, could not play in the last series for whatever reason, or down the stretch of the regular season, are Jonathan Kuminga and Trayce Jackson-Davis. Now, the players I felt like Kerr figured out very quickly were not going to be able to play in this series. Number 1, Quinton Post, who we saw after 3 minutes, did not see the floor again. They got outscored 13-0 right off the bat. I know that he had a great end of game 1. He's become a fan favorite. I think we might have seen the Pat Spencer experience sort of come to a close outside of a few minutes, just because the Warriors don't really have anybody who can handle the ball. But Spencer in this game, not great. 13 minutes, almost 14 minutes. He doesn't shoot enough. And although he can initiate offense, for me, he doesn't give you enough. And I think you saw why he's been a back of the roster guy for the majority of this season. He was a minus 20 tonight, which was a team worst. And then the third guy, which I hate to say is, and again, it's not to say that all of these players cannot play at different points, but we figured out tonight that they are not going to be seeing big minutes moving forward, at least until Steph Curry returns. And the other guy is Moses Moody. He's just simply lost his shot, and it feels like all confidence. Though he's playing with aggression, and on defense, you can still see it. He hasn't hit a shot since Game 6 of the last series. Tonight was 0 of 5, or 0 of 4 from 3. I thought a couple of his looks were a little unfair. He basically got grenades at the end of the shot clock on back-to-back possessions in the third quarter. One was an air ball. One barely found the backboard. But overall, Moses Moody just has not had it, I think, really since the midway part of that Houston series. And it's looking like those minutes are going to be going to someone else moving forward. So